I'm Richard Taylor from the Philosophy Department at Marquette University in Milwaukee. Together with my colleague, Professor Andrea Robilio, the Catholic University of Leuven, we present to you this course on Thomas Aquinas on metaphysics. This is our 11th class meeting since the start of the course in August at Marquette. Leuven students, of course, joined us in September, at the end of September. We're working now on the text of the De Hebdomadibus, the commentary on the De Hebdomadibus by Thomas Aquinas, and his reflections on this work. And you'll recall that in the first chapter, that is, in the first chapter of the De Hebdomadibus, Boethius talked about various concepts, and Aquinas said that it involved various kinds of conceptualization of things. We're going to continue in that mode, but here in chapter 2 of the commentary on the De Hebdomadibus, we'll see that Aquinas is concerned about the way things are conceptualized, but also the way realities are. So concepts, of course, have to do with our apprehension and our characterization of reality, but our concepts need not, in fact, reflect reality with precision. So something like the notion of common being, it's a phrase that could denote the being in a kind of general way other than God, but the being that is common to all things, even though each individual entity has its own being. And so there is being that is common to squirrels, trees, human beings. That's an abstraction formed by the human mind. It's not a thing which as a reality or a thing is participated as such, but rather being is given to each individual entity, as we'll see, and it is given as the act of being, and that brings about the realization of an essence in the world that continues to have within it a distinction of essence and existence, or essence and being. We want to be very careful about the terminology then as we go through, and that's my purpose with regard to this first lecture, 11a, and with regard to the second lecture, 11b. So here, Boethius will speak about to be, being, and esse, and he'll also speak about that which is, id quod est, or ens. And for the latter, I will sometimes use the term entity, but I mean by that a determinate particular entity. Right? And with regard to being, esse, to be, that then will be an abstraction, and it also regards then the actuality of the entity, the actuality of the being that the entity has, the entity again as a determinate particular. And in that sense, the entity participates being in order to be actualized as an entity in the world. And so we'll see Aquinas talk about being as something that is not yet. And what he means by that is that for being to exist, it has to be instantiated as the actuality in an individual which is an id quod est, that which exists, or the thing existing, which is the same as the ends, or individual ends existing in the world. And so the terminology can be very tricky, and that's why I want to walk through this fairly carefully with you. So let's proceed. In chapter 2 of the commentary on the De Hebdomadibus, Aquinas deals with what we know today to be the principles for reasoning, and that is the hebdomads, namely the 7 principles. Aquinas wasn't aware of the precise meaning of the term hebdomad, and many of his contemporaries and predecessors were quite confused as to what this meant. But they understood the content of it. They understood that these are concepts which are formulated by the human mind and for discussion and understanding. That is, they're principles for reasoning. So the 7 principles are outlined here, and these guide Boethius in his formation of his answer to the question of how substances are good insofar as they are, although they are not substantial goods. That's the question Boethius is going to be looking to. So here, let's review the 7 and then look carefully at the explication of Aquinas. First of all, 1. Being, that is esse, and that which is, id quod est, are diverse. I'm going to offer you my comments on this as we go through. So there's a distinction between the thing which exists in reality and being. For being itself, ipsum esse, so just being considered in itself, as yet is not. So it doesn't exist until there is a particular to receive being. That's the sense of what Aquinas is talking about. So being considered prior to its reception in some receptive entity, some receptive thing, in virtue of which it makes that thing to be, being itself considered here then, prior to that is not. Okay, prior to that, it doesn't have any reality. Remember, it is an abstraction. We're separating what is in the individual entity, separating it into two things, and two aspects, as it were. One aspect is the being of the thing, the other aspect is the quiddity or the whatness of the thing. But that quiddity or whatness has to be realized in actuality. So Aquinas, when he says not yet, he doesn't mean temporally, because temporally the two come together at once, because the entity that receives being must be actualized by being in order to be. But there is a certain priority here, and there's a certain metaphysical priority for being over the essence, and being is metaphysically prior to the existence of the essence of the thing or that which is. But we go on then. Here, being esse and that which is id quod est are diverse, for being itself as yet is not. That which is, however, once the form of being has been taken on, is and stands together. Now that stands together, it means it is as a substance and it has substantial existence. So once it receives. Now, the fact that we say once it receives doesn't mean that it was existing out there waiting to receive as such, but rather that indicates once it's received, it indicates that it had to receive something in order to be a reality. And that what it has to receive is esse, as its actuality, as we'll see shortly. Number 2 of the hebdomads, then, what is, quod est, can participate in something, which is what I was just indicating, right? What is can participate in esse, or being. It is able to receive it. It can have a share of actuality of it. So what is can participate in something, but being itself in no way participates in anything. That is, being itself includes all things, and so there isn't something else that it's going to participate in some way, because there's nothing outside of it in that sense. He goes on, for participation occurs when something already is. Something is, however, when it is received being. So don't be thrown off by these temporal adverbs and descriptive terms and that sort of thing. Something that already is. Participation is going to involve the sharing of something, and that which is participated. That is the perfection of some kind or actuality of some kind that is going to be participated in the thing that receives it. That first thing is prior. Now, in the Proposition 23 of the Elements of Theology of Proclus the Neoplatonist, distinguishes the transcendent thing, the participated perfection, and the participant. And that's really quite valuable to keep in mind. So we might have the house, and the perfection that is being participated, and the thing that participates. So house itself is not, the house itself is not in the thing as such, but rather it gives to the thing to be a house, and the house that exists is the individual particular house which participates being. Now I just use it to set up the three terms here. So there is, as it were, the ultimate perfection. Let's use Platonic terms, because that's what Proclus is talking about. In terms of an ultimate perfection, then we have the form of human being. The human being that is a form in Platonic terms. And there's a perfection that is participated. It isn't that the form itself, the form wholly in itself, the very form, comes down and is in the individual exactly in the same mode of actuality and being that it has when it's separate. No, it remains separate. But its causality of participation that causes it to be in the individual human being in the world, or the individual house in the world, that perfection comes to it from the form. And so what does the house participate? Or the human being participate? The house or the human being is participating, in order to be a house or human being, it is participating something that is given to it or caused in it by the separate idea or form of house or human being. Now that's the analysis of Proclus in Proposition 23 of his Elements of Theology. But the same sort of thing is going on here. These distinctions are being made, and Aquinas will talk about this a bit later as well, in a similar fashion. But let's proceed. Third, that which is, namely id quod est, can possess something other than what it itself is, quod ipsum est. Being itself, however, ipsum vero esse, has nothing outside itself as an admixture. So there's nothing that's going to be added to being itself because everything is concluded within being. But id quod est, the particular entity, particular existing thing, is able to have something besides being or existence, the being or existence of a substance. Well, what can it have? It can have accidents. Okay, so the individual can have diverse accidents. One individual entity or id quod est can have brown hair, another gray hair, another blonde hair, another black hair, all sorts of things. One can be fat, one can be thin, one can be tan, one can be pale. There's all sorts of other things. So that which is can possess something other than what it itself is. So the human being as substance can have other attributes as well, and those attributes are accidental. Attributes are accidental instances of being. Number 4. Notice here with regard to number 4, I have something crossed out from the translation because I'm correcting the translation according to my understanding of this. So number 4. However, to be something, esse aliquid, and to be something in that which is, are diverse. Now to be something in that which is means in the id quod est, in the thing that exists, then being is received in that, and that is going to be the substance. Now to be, and the phrasing that he's using there, then to be something is to have another predicate set of something. Well, these are the accidents that can accrue, such as being tan or being pale and that sort of thing, accrue to a substance. So he's just distinguishing here in how the terminology is being used. To be something, he's going to use that to characterize accidental existence and the various accidents that can be had. To be something in, he's going to talk about that as substance. Okay, so the substance can have being in it to make it a substance as such. Fifth, everything that is participates in that which is being. Now we'll pause for a moment. Everything that is participates in that which is being. Right, it has to participate in that which is being, because otherwise it wouldn't exist at all. It wouldn't be something that is. So everything that is, of course, participates in that which is being. With the result that it be. Well, I don't think that's really a very good translation, frankly. So, in order that it may be, is how I put it. Everything that is participates in that which is being, in order that it may be. So for something to be, it has to participate in being. That's all. Now we carry on. It participates in something else with the result that it be something. Now remember what we just had a moment ago, with the result that it be something. Okay, so then it can also participate and share in an accident. So, and through this, that which is, id quod est, participates in that which is being, with the result that it be. It is, however, with the result that it can participate in anything else you like. Okay, so again, this distinction between substance and accident. Substance has to participate being in a way that it is actualized by that being. But after that, the substance can also have accidental being. That's the kind of thing he's talking about here. 6. In every composite, being, esse, is other than the item itself. So, in every composite thing, there's a distinction of essence and existence. All right, and the and the being that a thing has is not identical with the thing that receives the being. So there's not a complete collapse of the being of a thing and the substance in that way. Rather, being needs to be received in order that the thing exists, and the thing be actualized in existence. He goes on, every simple item possesses its being, and that which is, as one. Now, what's a simple item, and what's a composite item? Well, a composite item would be something such as a dog or a squirrel or a horse in the physical world, or a tree in the physical world, and that is a composite item. It has an essence, and that essence needs to be actualized by being. And so in every composite item, there'll be a distinction of essence and existence, but also in composite material items, there'll be another distinction, and that is the distinction of form and matter. At any rate, in every composite, being is other than the item it is. Now we're just talking, we're not applying this yet, we're not proving anything, we're talking about concepts and notions and showing how they can be used and formed here. We go on. Every simple item possesses its being and that which is as one. So everything that is simple has the two of these as one. But there may be degrees of simplicity. You want to keep that in mind. We're going to talk about degrees of simplicity later on. There is in this context of our discussion here, there is only one thing that is absolutely simple. But there are other things that are simple as well, namely such things as intelligences and angels and immaterial entities, entities that don't have matter. They have in themselves the distinction of essence and existence, and they are composite in that way, but they don't have the composition of matter the way material things are in the physical world. So in that way, we'll see Aquinas is able to set up a notion of God as absolute being with perfect simplicity and no composition whatsoever, and then other things that are simple in the sense that they don't have matter and they're not composites of matter and form, but nevertheless they have a degree of simplicity, but not the fullness of simplicity because they are composites of essence and existence. And the third is that which has what Aquinas elsewhere calls a double composition, a composition of matter and form, and a composition of essence and existence. Pardon me. And finally, number 7, all diversity is discordant, whereas similitude must be sought. And what seeks something else is shown to be itself by nature such as that which it seeks. Now, I don't go into this. I'm not going to go into this the 7th point in the discussions, but in the discussion in these videos, this one and the next one, because there's only so much time. But I leave that for you. But notice what he's after here with regard to the notion of good. All diversity is discordant, whereas similitude must be sought, and what seeks something else is shown to be itself by nature, such as that which it seeks. So the participation in goodness by things here, the participation in absolute goodness by things here is responsible for the goodness of things here. We'll see that later on in the discussion of the commentary on the De Pneumatibus. Now, in his exposition, Aquinas first reminds his readers of the method of Boethius, and we can't lose track of that. We need to remember this. There are rules and terms that are knowable and set out for us. And so we start with those common notions. And these may be notions that are common to everyone, but it may also be that only the more sophisticated, who have time to reflect on it, who don't have to work hard in the fields and do all kinds of other things, and who don't lack education and that sort of thing, the way the poor do, and the peasants in the time of Aquinas. Okay, so there may be different ways of understanding for the educated and the uneducated, but there are some things that are common to all. And some of those common notions, such as being, is available to all, but the common folk are not able to penetrate into the meaning of these terms to the great depth that others who are educated can, particularly those who are educated in philosophy. So Aquinas reminds us then we're here dealing with rules and terms knowable, and these are set out as common. And on the basis of that, he proceeds to explain the conceptions that are known to the wise. So we all experience the world here, and in some sense we all experience being. But to understand being and being qua being and many other notions requires a great deal of sophistication and rethinking the way the natures of things are here present in the world to us. And also to distinguish between what is a common notion and what is a reality. Because we can say that all things exist, therefore they all share being in some way, and that we have a notion of a common ends or a common being. But they are really not common. It isn't really that the being is one common being that belongs to all things as such. Rather, the common being is a notion that's made by abstraction on the basis of the experience of many particular kinds of being in the world. Now, so this is to begin with what is most evident, as I said, most evident, that's going to be being, most evident and easy to grasp. And then to derive from these what is much more difficult to conceive and has to be left to those who are well educated and sophisticated in philosophy. Now, the most common notions, according to Aquinas in his account here, are being, one, and good. These are the transcendental notions. You will recall for Avicenna, in his Metaphysics, his dialectical discussion started with the necessary, the existent, and the thing, which for him are the primary notions. And these are immediately present to the soul, he says. Now, with Aquinas here then, being itself can be considered as something common to all things. And that's what I've been talking about, a kind of common being. So everything, I look out my window and I see trees and a lake and many other things. And what do they all have in common? Well, a tree and a lake, they're all material things in some way, but they also have in common being. And they also have in common a sense of unity. And they also have in common then a sense of goodness. But what goodness is in each of them is not identically the same, and the nature of the unity of each is not exactly the same, but certainly with regard to each, the being is individual. It's this existing tree, and this existing grass, and this existing bush. These are the many pieces of grass, that is. These are determinate particulars. And so, leaving aside the determinate particulars as such, or implicitly not prescinding from them, but I can form a general notion of being. But it's an abstraction. So being itself, as an abstraction, can be considered as something common to all things. And so it is itself indeterminate. So as an abstraction, it's undetermined. Now, one thing has grass being, another thing has bush being, another thing has squirrel being, another thing has tree being. And so it's indeterminate, but in each individual it's determined. It's because the being that is common to the tree that belongs to the tree is not the same being that belongs to the bush or to the grass. So being itself can be considered as something common to all things by an intellectual abstraction. So in this way, being itself is indeterminate. The determination takes place in the individual subject, the individual tree, this particular bush, this particular piece of grass. The determination can take place in the subject possessing being or in predication of accidental qualifications of a subject. Now, the predication of accidental qualifications, brown tree, or green leaves, now yellow leaves, and then changing later into red leaves. These are accidental changes. And we can say that those leaves are red, and we can predicate it that way. So the determination takes place in the subject that possesses being. So it's that way. The being of the tree as such, and the kind of tree it is, takes place in the individual tree that has being, and that particular kind of being relevant to the deciduous or coniferous tree or this particular species of tree. But it can also have determinations by way of accidents. Accidents with regard to the size, that is the quantity, or the qualities, or the color, or other things. And these are all determinations of being. So when he talks about being itself here, he's talking about an abstraction. And that abstraction it works because all the things out here exist. And they all have being in some way. But when I speak in that abstractive way, I don't want to say that there's one being that all things literally and concretely share in as such. No. Being is, in this case, being is a concept formed by the mind. Now, the diversity of being and that which is I'm paraphrasing Aquinas now to explain what he's doing. The diversity of being and that which is lies in the conceptual consideration of these. Since the first, that is being or to be, is, as I just said, an abstract signification of what? It abstractly signifies the activity of the concrete thing or that which is, or entity. So all these concrete entities, all these concrete particular entities out here, I can signify their being in an abstract way and say that they all are, and they all commonly have existence. I can do that. And the having of existence is that having of existence which is particularized in each individual case can be signified in an abstract way. But being is actual and active in each and every one of them as concrete. But I can say they're all beings. And we can say they all participate in being. I just haven't specified which kind. I haven't specified substantial or accidental, but I haven't specified what how the being is received into the particular essence. So, being or existence is that which makes the concrete thing an entity. But what is this being itself, taken as distinct from the concrete entity? Again, to reiterate this, Aquinas spells it out very clearly, and because he's doing this because he wants to show what conceptualization gives us, but also that it gives us an abstraction that doesn't exist as such. It doesn't exist as an abstraction as such, but rather it's a way the human mind deals with the plurality of the instances of being in the world. Eventually, though, Aquinas is going to wants to say that in fact there has to be more to this, and there has to be a cause of being in a way too. But we're going to get to that a little bit later. So number one here then, being or to be does not signify the subject, that is the entity. So when I talk about the being or to be, I'm not telling you what, as it were, flavor it is, what kind it is. Is it the being of a squirrel? Is it the being of a tree? Is it the being of a bush? Is it a being of grass? It's not specified. So when we use to be, it does not signify the subject. We do not say that being or to be is, why? Because it's the activity that's going to belong to something else, the activity of actually existing that's going to belong to something else. But rather, we say that the subject, or that which is, namely the entity, the particular tree, the bushes, the grass, etc., those are the subjects which receive being and then exist. So I say here then, but rather that the subject, or that which is, as the entity, is existing. Hence we say that the subject, or that which is, and I'm going to call it the entity. It's not precisely Aquinas' terminology here, but we're talking about ends here, and a particular ends. So hence we say that the subject, or that which is, the entity, participates or shares in being, or the act of being. Now that act of being will distribute itself in different ways with regard to each thing, because what exists are particulars. Okay, so it's going to be shared in different ways. And I call attention to my own language here, namely that in the previous slide I slipped into the notion of activity, and also that I've slipped into using the notion of the entity here as well. But being here is the actuality of something, and it is the activity as well. And I think that helps understand what Aquinas is doing. There is a connection, by the way, for those of you who are familiar with Plotinus, there is a connection here with the use of the term actuality, or energeia, by Plotinus in Enneads 6:8. And I'd be glad to discuss that with you individually sometime, but there is a connection there. I'll leave that, I mean, I've written something on this, but I'll leave that for another opportunity for us to talk perhaps individually. And you certainly have my email address, and you know how to get a hold of me. So, being, or to be, itself, then, is an abstract characterization of the activity which exists in the subject, or that which is, the entity. So it is not the subject, but rather what is received into the subject in order to make that subject into the entity in actuality. Again, remember, we are talking about an ontological priority here. And so it isn't as though the entities are sitting around with pseudo-being for a while, and then suddenly they're given real being, because there's no such thing as pseudo-meaning. So what we have here then is an ontological priority of being to the individual thing that possesses being, and certainly not a temporal priority at all. Pardon me. So in the case of substance, being or to be makes the subject subsist. That's what makes this particular dog subsist as a dog. In the case of accidents, those accidents are qualifications that depend on the substance which they qualify. It's a white dog. All right, that's whiteness. It's an accident in the dog. It's a whiteness in some way. The existence of whiteness depends upon the existence of the subject or the dog in which it's present. That's the nature of the kind of being that accidents have. Accidents have being which is dependent upon a substance. And then they qualify that substance. The dog's hair may be, oh, my hair was once brown and now it's gray. And so the accidents change over a period of time. So accidental being is being in dependence upon another thing. That is, it's dependent on the substance. Now, number two, the second way the diversity takes place is a kind of logical participation. Human participates in animal, but it's not identical to each and every thing that participates animal. Other things can participate animal. Bird can participate animal. But it does participate. It has a share of it. Shares in animal, but it also shares animal along with bird and dog and cat and many other kinds of things. But they're all animals. That's what we mean. They each, in a sense, share. And these kinds of animals are not identical to one another. So it's not identical to each and everything that participates animal. And we call that then participation. It has a part of. So phrase it another way, part of animal involves human animal. Part of animal involves bird. So there's bird animals, and so forth. And Socrates then also, Socrates participates in, notice we're exercising the language here. Socrates participates in human. But so does Plato, and so does Aristotle, and so does Thomas, and many others participate in human. So it is not identical. The individual is not the individual is not identical to each and everything that participates human. They only have, as it were, a small share. Now, this is the puzzles that go back to Plato's Parmenides, where he talks about how it is that things are participated. And he uses the idea of throwing a canvas or a tarp or something over things. And is that the way things participate being? They each have a little piece of the tarp over them? That physical imagery doesn't work, because being would be divided up into all different little pieces. And they wouldn't all have the same being, as it were. So, in fact, that's one of the tricks and criticisms of the theory of participation that Plato made against himself. Or against those who I think more likely against those who naively were talking about the theory of participation. So let's proceed. I was referring there to Plato's dialogue to Parmenides. Pardon me. So let's go through this again a little bit slowly, just to be very, very clear. A particular subject, call it A, shares or participates in an accident, call it B. So this particular subject, myself, participates in the accident of gray with regard to my hair. So gray with regard to hair, though, is an accident that many other people participate in. That's why I say here, which is also had by others. The accident can be had by others. And matter, call it A, shares or participates in form, B. Okay, so in the case of my dog participates in the particular dog, who is a composite of matter and form, participates or shares in form. There are many other dogs. but the matter particularizes it, and she's a particular instantiation of a canine or a dog. And that dogness is shared by other things as well. And so we have both the generic and the specific kind of dog, and that sort of thing. It's shared by many other individuals. So here in this case, participation means that A has B as a particular determinant of A. So A is determined in some way. It has the characteristic B, and it is determined by that. So participation involves that. And now quotation from Aquinas then. A quote, and similarly too, an effect is said to participate in its own cause. Now it doesn't wholly exhaust it, because that cause could have other effects as well. So, and similarly too, an effect is said to participate in its own cause, and especially when it is not equal to the power of its cause. As, for example, if we should say that air participates the light of the sun. It shares in the light of the sun. It shares in some of the power of the light of the sun. But it doesn't have the totality of that which is in the sun. It shares in a diminished way. So Aquinas goes on to say, because it does not receive that light with the brilliance it has in the sun. So what we have is the perfection, the participated perfection, and the participant. That's why I want to put it in these terms from Proposition 23 of the Elements of Theology. And we have to distinguish these in this way. And so the cause affects something outside of itself and brings about an effect. And so that effect is sharing in the cause, but without having the very essence of the cause itself, which is unique. Okay, so with regard to the form of human being, there is one form of human being as such. And so there's a sharing of that, and that sharing takes place in the thing that shares. But it's in a diminished way. It doesn't have the perfection that the cause has. Now, the abstract to be cannot participate in anything in the first two ways. That is, matter participates in form, subject participates in accident, but it doesn't work that way with regard to be, because it's abstract. And nor can it do so as a particular participates a universal. So to be can't do it that way. It isn't a universal notion, and that is, it isn't something that participates in something else either. Hence, says Aquinas, quote, to be itself is most common, whence indeed it is participated in by others, but still does not participate in anything else. So the common notion of being that I have of all these trees and other things outside, that common notion I have, then they all participate in one thing, namely common being in some way. But common being, there's nothing outside of it. I mean, what could be outside of being? It would have to be some kind of non-being. But being, common being, taken in the broadest sense, under which all these things I see out my window participate and share in, that's an abstract notion and a generalization based on the experience that we have of particular individuals that exist in the world. And in this case, particular kinds of individuals that exist in the world. Now that which is, or entity, that's my term here, that's how I want to render ends. That which is, or entity, is concrete. It's concrete, it's in particular entities. So that which is outside, the tree outside my window, that is a particular, determinate particular tree. And it also can be considered most common. There's a way to talk about ends. We can be considered as a determinate particular. We can also talk about it as something common, because all of these things are beings. They're in all existing things. That common being is shared by all. And it participates the abstract being or to be itself. So the generalization, so the individuals that we have here, even the notion of common ends, necessarily involves the participation or sharing of the essay, That is the abstract notion of being, where the abstract notion of being here is that activity or actuality of being. It has to be shared in each thing for it to exist. So to be is participated, to be itself is participated by the concrete thing. But to be itself does not participate in something above and beyond it, since there's nothing above and beyond it. You can see in some of this, the kind of thinking we have to do, and the kind of very careful therapy we have to do with language, as something similar to what's found in the poem of Parmenides with regard to the notion of what is. And that's why it was a good exercise for you to look over that material and to read through the poem of Parmenides. It's a good exercise for the mind. Now, to be, then, is participated by the concrete thing, and to be is also then said to be received in the concrete that which is. That is, the concrete ends, the concrete individual. So in that sense, since being is not already there in the thing itself, but rather when it has the actuality of being, the entity exists, then this to be or esse is received into the concrete, and it's through that concrete thing that through the determination of being by that concrete thing that the concrete thing exists. So being is received into the dog, and it gives you a dog. And being is received into the tree, and it gives you a tree. But in each case, the being gives you a determinate tree, a determinate dog, because being in general and that sort of thing is an abstraction. Number 3, he sets down a third quote. He sets down a third difference where he says that which is, etc., possess. Now, and this difference, Aquinas writes, is grasped through the admixture of something extraneous. Concerning this, one must consider that with respect to whatever is signified abstractly, so regarding whatever is signified abstractly, what has truth has nothing extraneous to it. So what is most truly this, it has nothing extraneous to it, namely what is outside its own essence. It doesn't have anything outside its own essence. For instance, we're talking about such things as humanity, whiteness, and other things said in this way, namely said in the abstract way. Humanity does not exist as a determinate particular. Humanity is a form of conceptualizing the characteristic that is common to all human beings. And so to whiteness is a way of characterizing what is common to all white things. And whiteness doesn't participate redness itself, and humanity doesn't participate something else. Rather, these are full and complete in their own essences. That is, to put it in my own words, that is, the signification in this case is of the abstract alone that is participated by other things. So that's the way we're using language. That's the way we're using our language to express our concepts here and the way we understand things. When we talk about saving humanity, or through education we'll save humanity or something of that sort, there's no humanity as such. It's an abstraction. We're talking about saving human beings in a certain way. All right, so the concrete item which participates the abstract can share other things, but we've already seen that, right? The concrete item which participates the abstract can also share other accidents. Quote, therefore, a human and a white item can possess something other than humanity or whiteness. And this is the reason why whiteness or humanity are signified after the fashion of a part. So whiteness or humanity are a part of the human being. And they are not signified to be predicated. They're signified as a part and are not predicated of concrete terms. We do not say that John is humanity. We do not say that that the whiteness in the boat is whiteness in some way. Okay, so we don't do it that way. He says, just as a part is not predicated of its whole. Close quote. We do not say then John is humanity, but that he has humanity. Now, I want to pause here because I've been going for quite some time, I see. And I'm going to stop here now, and the next video will be shorter. It seems like I've gone almost 40 minutes with this video. The next video will be considerably shorter, and I'm aiming to have the two videos together to add up to about 60 minutes. All right.